Tyranny is as old as the pharaohs and the pyramids, that the state stands above all men and their individual aspirations. As you may be able to tell from the title of this video, in this video I'm going to prove without a shadow of a doubt that we have been living under a tyrannical government since 1789. But before I reveal the 100% proof of said tyranny, I must first undertake the philosophical effort of defining tyranny and defining what a tyrant is, and relating a tyrant to a sovereign. According to the dictionary, a tyrant, or a tyranny, is a cruel and oppressive government or rule. I don't like this definition because it's too narrow, it's too simple-minded. It does not cover the tyrannies or the tyrants who do not rule in a cruel manner. It does not cover the benevolent tyrants. And yes, there is a such thing as a benevolent tyrant. To understand this, I want to look at one of the synonyms for tyranny, and that is absolute power. I did this in another one of my videos, and I said that a tyrant is a person with absolute power, and specifically absolute power, if we look at the word absolute, its root word is absolvere, and absolvere is basically to absolve. And I said in a previous one of my videos that a tyrant is one who has the power to absolve another of their destiny or their right to rule themselves. Here, I'm going to do a little twist on that, and I'm going to say that a tyrant is one who has an absolute power, and by absolute power, I mean the power to absolve themselves of having to follow the common law, of having to follow the law that everyone else has to follow. Now that we have taken the first philosophical step in properly defining tyranny, of changing the definition of tyranny from the narrow definition of a cruel and oppressive government or rule to the definition of rule by one who has absolute power, it is time to take the next philosophical step of relating said tyranny to a sovereign. And now the dictionary definition for sovereign. There are two definitions here that concern us, one being a noun and the other one being an adjective. But before I go into these, I first want to talk about the root of sovereign. And if you look at the root of sovereign, one of the roots come from the Latin super, meaning above, and then the other one comes from reign. So we can say that a sovereign is one who reigns above. Now above what? Above the common law, above the law that everyone else has to follow. Now going back to the actual definitions that concern us. The one definition in the noun, a supreme ruler, especially a monarch, to me is a little too ambiguous. It's a little too vague. It doesn't really give us the bite that we're looking for. So we're going to look at the adjective definition for sovereign. And the adjective definition for sovereign is possessing supreme or ultimate power. And the synonyms for that are supreme, absolute, there goes that word absolute that we found in tyrant, unlimited, unrestricted, boundless. Those synonyms tell us that yes, a sovereign is one who is above the common law, one who is not restricted by the common law, one who has no bounds, and one who can absolve themselves from the common law. And this is precisely what a sovereign is. One who reigns from above the common law. I hope my philosophy isn't lacking. I hope that my philosophy was sufficient enough to convince you that there is no difference between a tyrant and a sovereign, because I won't be spending any more time in this video relating the two. Now I will be providing the 100% proof, the historical fact that we have been living under a tyranny or a sovereign since 1789. And this proof, this historically documented fact, can be found in what is known as the Northwest Ordinance. So, what is the Northwest Ordinance? For those of you who don't know, the Northwest Ordinance was an act of the Congress of the Confederation of the United States. The ordinance created the Northwest Territory, the first organized territory of the United States. And we're going to hold there for a second, because organized territories have their own Wikipedia page, and I want to take a look at what Wikipedia tells us about organized territories. So, territories of the United States are subnational administrative divisions directly overseen by the United States federal government. Unlike U.S. states and Indian tribes that have sovereignty alongside the federal government, only one territory has sovereignty. And I would like everyone to take note of the fact that here, it makes it as if the US states and Indian tribes are actually sovereign of the federal government, as if they aren't territories of the federal government. And you'll see why I want you to take note of that. So anyway, it goes on to say that the territories are classified by whether they are incorporated, i.e. part of the US proper, and whether they have an organized government through an organic act passed by the US Congress. And I advise everyone to go ahead and look into what an organic act is and meditate on it for a while. For now, I'm going to move on to why I asked you to take note of them making it appear like the states are not US territories, as if they're sovereign alongside the federal government. And that is because there's this little graph on the side of this Wikipedia, and it says, Territories of the United States, and then it shows the flag, and then under that, it says the 50 states and the federal district, and then it shows the Commonwealth, the incorporated unorganized territory, the unincorporated organized territory, and the unincorporated unorganized territories. So here, as you can see, before it said that there were incorporated organized territories. Well, it doesn't say incorporated organized territories here, but because we know that there are incorporated organized territories, and the only thing here that isn't listed with such a name is the 50 states in the federal district, we can say that the states are incorporated organized territories, and they are, in fact, territories of the United States, as if there is such a thing. Now, we're about to find out why they refer to the United States as if it is its own person, as if it is its own entity. And we're going to find this out by doing a little bit more reading about the Northwest Ordinance. So it goes on to say that the Northwest Ordinance was the response to multiple pressures: the westward expansion of American settlers, tense diplomatic relations with Great Britain and Spain, violent confrontations with Native Americans, and the biggest work of propaganda about the United States history, the weakness of the Articles of Confederation, and the empty treasury of the American government. And I'll go over this whole weakness of the Articles of Confederation and this assertion that the treasury was empty in one of the future episodes of my arguments against the Constitution. For now, let's focus on the Northwest Ordinance. So, it was based upon, but more conservative than Thomas Jefferson's proposed ordinance of 1784. Wow, this is actually going to be more conservative than Thomas Jefferson's proposed ordinance of 1784? That ordinance must have just been outright atrocious then, and you'll see why. So, the 1787 law relied on a strong central government, which was assured under the new Constitution that took effect in 1789. In August 1789, it was replaced by the Northwest Ordinance of 1789, in which the new Congress reaffirmed the ordinance with slight modifications. It goes on to say that this was one of the most important legislative acts of the Confederation Congress. And then it says this little thing. It established the precedent by which the federal government would be sovereign. And that right there, my friends, is the proof that we have been living under a tyranny ever since this act was reaffirmed by the new Congress in 1789. Or if you want to say it more correctly, living under a sovereign since 1789. Because as it says right here, this act set the precedent for which the federal government would be sovereign. And sovereign is like the definition of sovereign that we used before. Here, it is also the same definition of sovereign as in owning all the land like a king would. Okay, this is precisely why the federal government acts above common law and can tax us the way that they do. This is why they can forever tax you on the property that you own, because you don't own it. You are renting it from the sovereign, from the king. And this is also why they can tax you on your labor, the work that you do, because you're doing the work in their kingdom. And thus, they see it like they're doing you a service. like you are using their space or the federal government space to make money, and thus the federal government has a right to tax you. And this is also why they can pass laws that violate your Bill of Rights, because they are above your Bill of Rights. And this is also why they can steal your land, and this is exactly what they're doing when they enact eminent domain laws. They're stealing your land, they're stealing your property using this eminent domain clause, and this is them acting above common law. It's them basically saying, hey, we have the right to steal your land. You know that stuff that other people can't do, all the other people can't do in common? They can't come over and steal your land and tell you that it's for your own best interest? Yeah, they can do that because they are tyrants, they are sovereign, they are above the common law. And it even talks about this in this Wikipedia. If we read past where we were just at, it goes on, it says, federal government would be sovereign and expand westward with the admission of new states. And this is actually a whole other can of worm, that the federal government and not the individual states is the one who decides on which states come in and how they come in. That's a whole other can of worms. But I'll talk about that in one of my arguments against the Constitution videos. So it goes on. Rather than with the expansion of existing states and their established sovereignty under the Articles of Confederation. It also set legislative precedent with regards to American public domain lands. It then goes on to say this little bit of sophistry. It says, the U.S. Supreme Court recognized the authority of the Northwest Ordinance of 1789 within the applicable Northwest Territory as constitutional in 1851, but did not extend the ordinance to cover the respective states once they were admitted to the Union. This is sophistry, and we know it's incorrect, or maybe it's just talking about specific clauses in the Northwest Ordinance, and not the clause that declared the federal government to be sovereign. And the reason why I say that this is sophistry, and I believe just totally untrue, is because the federal government has still behaved as a sovereign. It has exercised eminent domain laws in every state. And not only has it exercised eminent domain laws in every state, it has also because it has continued to be the body that is responsible for the admission of new states. I know that many of the people who view this video will argue that the federal government is not its own entity though. It is made up of individuals from the different states. So it's actually representatives from the different states who are doing this, and not this fictional body known as the federal government. And my argument to that is that these representatives from these individual states do not actually represent the people from those states. These representatives are actually not representative of a majority of the people from the states that they come from. These representatives are part of an aristocracy. They are part of a higher class, and they, as people like to say, are part of the 1%. And not only are they part of the 1%, but even if they weren't part of the 1%, there are only 435 members in Congress, and another 100 in the Senate, making the number of representatives in the federal government 535. And if you want to include the president, who doesn't really represent any individual state, we'll say 536. So there are 536 representatives in the federal government. 536 people could never properly represent the over 300 million individuals that make up the United States. And this was actually one of the arguments that the Anti-Federalists made. At the time that the federal government was being established, at the time that it was being ratified, the time that the U.S. Constitution was being ratified, one state, the representatives that made up one state's representatives, the representatives in that state's legislature, had more representatives in that one legislature than the entire federal government did. But I will talk about that more in one of my arguments against the Constitution videos. For now, I ask the viewers of this video to give me their feedback, and especially if they have criticism. Open a dialogue with me. Convince me that I am wrong. Please, I beg of you. I would rather not feel like I live under a tyranny. It does nothing good for my health. We are a nation founded as a rebuke to tyranny, a nation of revolutionaries who refused sovereign reign from afar, a nation built on our differences, guided by the belief that we're all created equal. Michelle Obama pretending to be someone she isn't.